Genetically modified foods have sparked a lot of controversy all over the world, especially in the United States. In this huge controversy lies a sub-controversy over whether or not GMO food labeling should be required. Genetically modified foods are organisms that have had their genes or traits switched with a different desired trait by scientists. The list of genetically modified foods are rapeseed, honey, cotton, rice, soybean, sugarcane, tomatoes, corn, sweet corn, canola, potatoes, flax, papaya, squash, red-hearted chicory, cottonseed oil, tobacco, meat, peas, vegetable oil, sugar beets, dairy products, and vitamins. There are four main methods of genetic modification: recombinant DNA, microinjection, electro and chemical poration, and bioballistics. The recombinant DNA method uses plasmids and viruses to carry different outside genes into cells. Microinjection is another method used in genetic modification. This method involves injecting genetic material containing a new gene into the recipient gene. Electro and chemical poration is a method which involves creating pores or holes in the cell membrane to allow new genes to enter. The last method is called bioballistics, where metal slivers deliver genetic material to the inside of the cell using a shotgun. The controversy is that GMOs are said by scientists to be perfectly fine for human consumption, but many people do not believe this. There have been concerns about the health and environmental effects of genetic modification, since genetically modified foods have not been definitively shown to be safe to eat. In addition, using GMOs would increase animal stress and lead to a couple of companies dominating food production in the world. There are also plethora upsides of using GMOs. In the Human Genome Project, for instance, 20,000 to 25,000 genes were identified in human DNA. The action of genetically modifying organisms can lead to cures of diseases and many more great scientific feats. And this controversy sets a sub-controversy about whether or not food labeling of genetically modified foods should require proper labeling. Many people have strong opinions about whether or not labeling on genetically modified foods should be required. Concerns regarding the health and environmental safety of using genetically modified foods have been raised by many people around the world. This dilemma for the US really started to heat up recently when California failed to pass the Proposition 47 on November 11th of 2012, which would have required mandatory food labeling on GMO foods. After the rejection of Proposition 37, ABC News conducted a survey by telephone that suggested very different public opinions. This poll included a random national sample of 1,024 adults. The results showed many Americans sided with mandatory food labeling. 93% of the people who answered the survey believe that the federal government should require labels on food stating whether the food's been genetically modified. Moreover, 57% said that they'd be less likely to buy foods labeled as genetically modified. This puts the food industry into quandary. While only 5% of Americans say they'd be more likely to buy food labeled as genetically modified, 52% say they'd be more likely to buy food that's labeled as having been raised organically. To add to the problem for food industries, genetic modification of foods is very unpopular with women, as 62% of women believe that genetically modified foods are unsafe to eat. This view is shared by far fewer men, as only 40% of men deem these foods unsafe. If there were labels on genetically modified foods, 49% of men and 65% of women would be less likely to buy. There are four main arguments for why labeling should be required. The first reason is that consumers have the right to know what they are eating, especially about foods that have sparked health and environmental concerns. The second reason is that labeling will allow consumers to identify and steer away from foods that could be problematic. The third reason is that most Americans are in favor of mandatory labeling. And the final argument for mandatory labeling is due to religious reasons, as they may lead people to avoid eating products, which include animal DNA. There are also three main arguments against mandatory food labeling. The first reason against it is that consumers who want to buy non-genetically modified foods already have the option of buying organic foods. By the definition of the word organic, if the food is organic, it cannot be genetically modified. The second reason is that if a nutritional or allergenic difference were found in a GM food, current FDA regulations would require a label. And finally, labeling of genetically modified foods would implement an additional cost on all consumers. This is a very important argument that may go back and forth for many years to come. Presently, GMO food labeling is not mandatory, but with many people desiring the mandatory labeling, no one knows what will happen.